Tom Nash made a video about him describing how Google is more of like a growth company and why that's one of his top investments and holdings. I'll link that right here. Go check it out. It's a really awesome video. I definitely think he's right and I totally agree with him. I discussed that I was researching a potential investment into Google when I talked about CrowdStrike. I'll link that over here. Feel free to go check it out if you want. I'm just sharing my experiences. Of course, this is not financial advice or anything like that, so take that for what you will. Maybe just use this as research. Google is one of those companies that you just can't underestimate. They have a lot of different tentacles in different areas of the tech industry, and they are a juggernaut. Now, in the era of Tesla, when everything is Tesla against legacy auto, there's a potential to look at Google and other big tech companies as kind of legacy. They're not. They move in a completely different speed. But getting back to Tom Nash, I kind of like his portfolio a little bit. He has like one stock that's like super potential high growth, which is Palantir. Another stock that's sort of in that predictable but still very, very aggressive growth stage, which is Tesla. And the other one is supposed to be the stalwart, huge heavyweight in the industry, kind of Google sitting there providing stability, past its growth phase, sort of more in its value phase. Or is it? No. Google, guys, is not a value company. It is 100% a growth company. I'll tell you the reason why. A few days ago, ARK Invest actually released a Twitter Spaces. I think it was Brett Winton, Will Summerlin, and Frank Downing. And two of these guys, actually probably all three of them, but two of these guys have very, very specific knowledge in the industries that they were talking in right now. The Twitter Spaces is called ARK Insights, more than twice more AI cost declines with Frank and Will. Okay. I won't obviously break down the whole thing. I'm going to go into another video on this stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about Google, why they're a juggernaut, and potentially how it affects Palantir, because I know I have a lot of Palantir listeners. Just listen up, okay? Let's just address the Palantir stuff right off the top. Palantir is a company that is potentially addressing things like AI, edge AI, decentralized computing, which is, by the way, very, very big. In my opinion, one of the biggest things that people are not really addressing, when it comes to YouTube or anything like that, it's coming down the future. The only person I know that really went super in depth with it is CodeStrap. Go check out his videos. Okay, Palantir is addressing that. In some other videos, I described that Microsoft, Oracle, all these like Salesforce, these kind of guys are Palantir's sort of immediate competition, right? Maybe, maybe not. But all we know is the final boss. So if Palantir's playing a game of life, right? The final boss that these guys have to go up against will almost unequivocally be Google. I can put my name on it, guarantee it 100%. Google is one of those companies. It is an absolute beast. Now, Tom goes on to talk about how they're, the commercial marketing and advertising space, they're kings. I'll bring someone on board that can explain that to you further. When it comes to advertising, Google is king. There's nobody even in second place. I mean, like maybe Adobe. Adobe probably is the second one. And they had to acquire a bunch of companies to create Adobe Analytics, and that's why they're kind of in second place. Decent product, but Google is just way, way, way better. At this point, actually, they even have AI models and machine learning models that you can import to do your ad work. And we'll get into that later when I do that interview. They have things that resemble some parts of Foundry. And I'll just name drop a few things like they have like Data Studio, DB360, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of tool sets within Google that they offer advertisers that have very, very similar, very eerily similar stuff to what Foundry might offer on a surface level. Okay, of course, Foundry is a different product, different kind of space altogether. It's more in depth in what they do, but Google is not the type of company that says, you know what, we'll just sit in the sidelines and see what comes by. They are very much a bleeding edge tech company that likes to do things right ahead of everybody else and be first on the table, be first to the line, and dominate wherever they can. Getting back to this podcast bit, they do talk about the AI cost declines and things like that. Now, I'll get into the sort of minutia as much as I can, at least. I'm not an AI expert, but I can sort of speak to some of it. But just to give you an idea, it's not like every company is going to be this AI company that are all the same. Some companies will cater to different parts of that AI pipeline than other companies will. Google might cater to more of those or less of those. It depends on where they see the value coming in. Facebook or Meta, for example, might cater to something closer to the consumer side or metaverse side, something like that, right? It's not like as soon as somebody does AI or machine learning, they're all the same as any other company. Let's get that misconception out of the way. That being said, the number one issue from before, especially in the 2010s, the problem was to actually train your models. So not to get too much into it, I'll make another video, but the idea is when you're trying to train some sort of ML, machine learning, you have a type of algorithm and you need to train that algorithm to create a model. And this training of that, you need to basically throw lots of different data sets at it, lots of different sort of types of data. You need to tell it what to look for in the beginning. There's a lot of training and staging and that kind of stuff. And this process actually takes a lot of resources, so a lot of compute to get this stuff actually fully ironed out. So this part was really the most expensive part for a while, just because you have to do it so many times to get like a perfect model or something close to what you were designing, okay? The cost of the equipment is actually going up, but they talked about this in the podcast. It's almost like, okay, so if the cost goes up by $1,000, for example, the actual result in the efficiency that it goes up by like almost like 60 times. So, it's like, yes, you're paying more, but you're paying more for a lot more. is really what's happening. Now, Google will play a very keen part in this because they do have the cloud with GCP. So will Microsoft. I'll get into that in the other video as well. But Microsoft is doing some really crazy stuff with AI. Amazon, I feel like, is the laggard here, unfortunately. But these three cloud providers are basically the king of the crop here. Okay, I mean, Oracle has their own, IBM has their own, but you know they're at best like second or third tier compared to these three. Okay, now I want to bring someone on to actually talk about the marketing stuff way more in depth. Somebody who's actually dealing with this stuff almost on a daily basis. All right, so I'll do that. But now moving on to the cloud side of it, the reason why I say Tom is right is mainly because from when I started my career around 2012-13. Everything was AWS. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to refer to AWS, which is Amazon, Azure, which is Microsoft, and GCP, which is Google. All right. So AWS is still a very fantastic product. Originally, they started getting a lot of traction because they catered to a lot of startups. That was the era where everyone was doing startup. Everyone and their grandmother had a startup. There's a really good show that spun off of the culture of this stuff, which is called Silicon Valley on HBO. Fantastic. Go watch it if you haven't. Now, because of this whole startup sort of scene rising, AWS really catered to them. This is why they gained a lot of traction. Airbnb was a startup using AWS and that kind of stuff, right? So they have some big names. They have a really big sort of market there, very good reputation, that kind of stuff. But over time, things have really gotten convoluted. They've started releasing features that are very similar to the stuff they've already had. It's like, how many more database type of abstractions can you make, right? They have some very good features, but the thing is, it gets muddled alongside of the other bombardment of new features that come out, which really are just like small upgrades over the existing ones they already have. Like they have something called SageMaker, which is actually pretty good, but no one really uses it, and I don't really think AWS as a team cares much about it. I don't know, I'm just speculating, but it is what it is. In the beginning, from I'd say around 2012 to around 2016-ish, everything was AWS. That's where I actually got most of my chops. I started pretty much learning most of the cloud on AWS. Everywhere I worked was on AWS. Anything I migrated was to AWS and things like that. At that time, it was actually very, very good to use, very easy to use, developer friendly and all that stuff. Problem is right now, ever since I'd say 2017 all the way to now, so in the past 5 years, I've been slowly moving everything going to GCP. Now, Azure, by the way, is anywhere I worked has always been the secondary. You see what I'm saying? Microsoft is still there. They're almost like, yeah, we're comfortable taking second place, but they're always there. So anytime I was doing AWS stuff, they had Azure on the side as a secondary. Anytime I was doing GCP or Google, they had Azure on the side as a secondary. Now, everything I'm moving, everything I'm migrating, everything I do is pretty much almost always on GCP for almost every company I've worked for in the past 4 years. Yes, there's been some AWS here and there, but it's been like GCP 60, Azure 30, AWS 10, something like that. Okay, and most of it is because there's legacy applications or old applications that other teams are sort of not willing to move, and you know, a lot of politics there. Google's done a great job with their cloud. Actually, they've taken a lot of the more complex situations that you can find in AWS and simplified it. Things like IAM, things like security, they've made it very simple to onboard and simple to start using right away as a product. It's very easy to just get started using it as opposed to something like AWS, which used to be pretty quick. On top of that, Google has done a lot of stuff in the machine learning space, right? Their research engineers basically co-wrote things like TensorFlow, which is a fantastic product for machine learning. And on top of that, they've sort of like folded that into the Google AIP, the AI platform, which is a module within GCP that you can use to train your models. Palantir actually does offer this in, I believe, Apollo, and you can actually import those models into Foundry. So this isn't something that's totally out there for Palantir. So this is how it relates, right? Everything is moving in this direction. So as things are moving in this direction, Google is definitely, in my opinion, one of the leaders here. People don't talk about them much because they just focus on that advertising revenue that comes in, and it's a big piece, right? And this is one of the reasons why, like, this is a double-edged sword, right? You're looking at it from the other way, because advertising revenue is so lucrative for them, they might not want to deviate too much away from that. That's why it's hard for them to actually do a lot of R&D. They do tons of it, but they don't do it in a way that it gives them immediate business value just yet. So, you know, Google is definitely a juggernaut. They are doing crazy stuff in the AI space, and that is the next future. That is actually going to increase the amount of money. Like, I mean, it's going to be trillions of value created there. And that's, again, a thing that the podcast from ARK Invest talked about. So that's really my thoughts on that. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. If you're any engineers out there, let me know if I'm right. Are you using mostly GCP, AWS? What are you guys up to? I don't know. That's all I got. Talk to you guys later. Peace.